There's a lot of great coasters in Florida, and if you ask someone what their favorites are, you would probably get a lot of answers listing Disney classics like Space Mountain, Big Thunder Mountain, or Expedition Everest. You might otherwise hear people raving about newer additions throughout the Orlando parks like Cosmic Rewind, the Velocicoaster, or Hagrid's, or if you asked a coaster enthusiast what their favorites are, you'd probably hear a lot of people mentioning Mako and Iron Gwazi. While I enjoy most of the coasters in Florida, as a park fan, I also appreciate the older things too, even if they don't necessarily stack up to the newer, shinier additions. While it's not my favorite coaster in the state, I can appreciate the historic value of Kumba, which was not only a huge step up in layout design for B&M when it premiered in 1993, but on opening, it was also the only coaster of its kind in the state of Florida, really distinguishing Busch Gardens Tampa from Disney at a time when they were a lot more directly competitive. In that era, Busch Gardens was growing into a themed coaster park, which may not have had Disney levels of theming, but was much better than, say, Six Flags, still offering a ton of family entertainment and great animal exhibits. This will be followed by Montu in 1995, Gwazi in 1999, and Shikra in 2005, with the park really finding its market along the densely populated west coast of Florida. The history of this park is fascinating because it was legitimately one of the coolest parks ever developed until it was ripped apart by bad business decisions and private equity firms over the past decade, but part of why I find it fascinating is because this was the park I grew up closest to. Busch Gardens was originally known for its bird gardens and later its African animal exhibits in themed areas, but it was Python in 1976 that established this as a park with thrills, as this coaster was an aerial corkscrew model, which was pretty unknown and quite intimidating to audiences of its time. If you'd like to learn more about the history of how Busch Gardens developed, I actually covered it pretty extensively in a longer video that I'll link to, but along with Python really distinguishing the park through its novel inversions, it was followed in 1980 by Scorpion. That's what brings us to today's video, because Scorpion is a historic coaster, one that further established Busch Gardens' identity as a family park that also included intense, solid thrills, and one that has survived 44 years through its strong engineering. As of its last days of operation, it's still providing intense but relatively smooth ride experiences, and it has become an undeniable classic that is important to the park's history. I was really disappointed by Busch Gardens' recent announcement that it would stop operation September 2nd of 2024, only allowing just over a week for people to get final ride-throughs before its unceremonious closure. It's not the shiniest, newest, and largest coaster to premiere in the state, or at least it hasn't been for a long time, but it's a smaller, underrated personal favorite that I thought was worth highlighting just one last time. So today, come join me as we experience the final sting of the Scorpion.
All loose articles, such as hats and glasses. During your ride, please keep your hands, arms, legs, and feet inside the car at all times. Now sit back and enjoy your ride as you experience the sting of the Scorpion.
By the late 1970s, Busch Gardens had established itself as more than just bird gardens and a brewery tour, and embraced an African theme that was really unlike any theme park of the time. Continuing in this direction, its next big step was in 1980 with the opening of Timbuktu, a massive themed area based on the once powerful medieval city, famous as a trading hub of the Mali Empire in the 14th century. While perhaps not as grand, the land was notably large and contained a decent collection of flat rides, many of which were designed to appeal to younger children. The main dining area was known as Das Festhaus, which had a German theme and hosted live performances. That might seem odd, but the brewery aspect in the bird gardens took up a much larger portion of the park at that time, so I understand why it didn't feel out of place. Timbuktu was also notable for an outdoor theater, which hosted a show known as Dolphins of the Deep, which is similar to what you might find at SeaWorld, although Anheuser-Busch didn't acquire those parks for another 9 years. With a show geared towards families and a good selection of flat rides that ranged from mild to moderately intense, the land needed a standout thrill ride that could work to anchor this area. Opening 5 months after the park did, Scorpion premiered as this new, intense option and was manufactured by Schwarzkopf. It is one of only 3 models known as the Silver Arrow, and while the other 2 were designed to travel with fares around Europe, Scorpion is the only version that had a permanent installation, which made it notably rare. While it's definitely one of the smaller coasters among today's more intimidating lineup, this still would have appeared relatively extreme for its time. Unlike the double corkscrews of Python, Scorpion had a single vertical loop, which was relatively new and unknown to most park visitors, as the first contemporary instance of this element had only premiered 4 years earlier with the Great American Revolution at Magic Mountain. Most people in the park would have only ever seen a vertical loop on television, and so Scorpion was a pretty serious addition that complemented the already notable Python. While the original version of Scorpion was identifiable through its striking black and orange color scheme, it was eventually repainted to a softer orange, which comes off as red when contrasting with a new solid blue. In my opinion, this painting choice is garish and far less intimidating than the original, but I believe this change was made sometime in the early 2010s, but before 2014 when the park premiered Falcon's Fury, and Timbuktu was repainted and rethemed to Pantopia. The new, vaguely African mystical theme was an interesting refresh, and through its bold color choice, Scorpion's new colors fit this area a bit better, but between the two, I preferred Timbuktu and the black and orange Scorpion. By today's standards, Scorpion's layout is pretty straightforward, pulling out of the station immediately into a 60-foot lift hill, which provides decent views of the surrounding land. Reaching the top, the train banks steeply down to the right, achieving its top speed of 41 miles per hour and shuttling you through the vertical loop. Pulling out of it, you bank upwards and through a helix. This isn't an industry term, but I refer to this as the lasso due to its distinct shape, and finishing this segment, the train flies through the center of the loop, which was also a notable element of its time. From here, the train spends a decent amount of time descending through a series of downward helixes, which pulls some pretty strong positive Gs, and exiting the element, the train flies into the first brake run, which actually can be a bit rough. Before returning to the station, the train then flows into the next block zone, meaning that it can run 2 trains if the capacity is needed. For as old as the coaster is, Schwarzkopf was known for the quality of their engineering, and Scorpion runs extremely smoothly, even by contemporary standards. The ride experience is short but still relatively intense, and it plays well visually with the land. I would even go so far as to say that the vertical loop and the lasso elements are iconic to the identity of this park, and to see this historic coaster close, especially since it runs so well, really is highly disappointing. Scorpion may lack the scale of Kumba, the frightening presence of Montu, or whatever notable roles other coasters brought to the park later, but where it stands on its own is through its history. Like Python, its introduction was important in distinguishing Busch Gardens from the relatively new Magic Kingdom 60 miles east, providing thrills that you couldn't find elsewhere in the state while still maintaining a family-friendly park. While many of the bigger coasters are also getting up there in age, Scorpion also stands among the current park lineup as a distinctly classic experience, because despite its smaller size, it again still runs very well, offering a shorter, punchier thrill that is missing from the rest of the lineup. I think there's also something to be said about Schwarzkopf's train and track design, which isn't easily described, but feels unique in the park both visually and through how the coaster feels when riding. It's unfortunate that Busch Gardens is closing the coaster and with so little warning, because this really does still have a valuable place in the park. Unfortunately, the SeaWorld and Busch Gardens parks have been ravaged by Hillpath Capital, a private equity firm that holds a controlling stake in the company and is running the parks into the ground. Through cutting staffing, cutting park hours, pushing non-functioning park apps, charging outrageous prices for food, and having the audacity to hide 5% surcharges into orders and merchandise sales, it's clear that the park experiences are no longer prioritized. The current roadmap for the parks is to mostly focus on coasters and the occasional thrilling flat ride, because these are relatively cheap investments for the attendance that they draw. While I've had positive things to say about recent additions like Penguin Trek and Phoenix Rising, I still think that running the parks like Six Flags and trying to squeeze every cent you can out of park visitors will hurt them long term. Not that anyone in charge actually cares, but having grown up with these parks when Anheuser-Busch still operated them and made sure that they were well balanced with offerings for the whole family, it's frustrating to see them destroyed through such blatant short-sighted greed. While definitely not a family attraction, Scorpion was my first coaster with an inversion, and for myself and many others, was a really good first step into the bigger coasters that the park offers. By removing Scorpion, the park is not only removing a classic experience that many people have loved, but it also feels like removing history, in terms of both the park and the fact that Schwarzkopf has long been out of business, making their coasters rare. What makes this frustrating is that the coaster still runs well, and having spoken to one of the operators before it closed, it's apparently not too difficult to maintain and acquire parts for, which makes the closure seem really unnecessary. In my experience, the coaster always seems to have decent ridership, so it's not unpopular, and I have a feeling that it will likely be replaced with a flat ride in 2025. While Busch Gardens has not announced what will happen here, I do have a feeling that it won't be sold off and will probably be scrapped, which again is really disappointing because of its historic value. If it was sold off and moved to another park, I would feel a lot less negatively about its closure, but private equity firms don't care about culture or legacy, so I think that's the most likely scenario. Overall, if I could describe my feelings on the demise of the Scorpion, it's just pure disappointment, because despite its age, the coaster still has its place as a piece of history, especially in a park that has plenty of space for other additions. Scorpion is not the newest, largest, or most significant coaster in Florida, and so I feel like there are not too many people concerned about its closure, but for myself and many other people who grew up going to Busch Gardens Tampa, wanted to at least acknowledge the impact it had on us and its importance to park history. If you enjoyed this video, you could do me a favor by hitting the like button, especially since the topic is a bit more niche, and the video will probably have relatively low viewership. As always though, if you enjoy the channel and the videos that I produce, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button with bell notification if you have not yet done so to be alerted to new videos as they release.